Welcome to the In Love with PMDD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist, and I help you stop the monthly PMDD breakups. PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is in approximately 1 in 5 women, and it makes you want to break up with your partner approximately 1 to 2 weeks before your period every single month. So as someone who has suffered with PMDD for over 18 years, I dedicated my doctorate practice to helping partners navigate those monthly PMDD breakups with everything from attachment styles, triggers, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to touch, all of the things that you really struggle with when you're in PMDD. And I also dedicated my dissertation to a phenomenological study of the relationship experiences of partners of individuals who suffer with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I'm not just here to help the sufferer, the one who is suffering with PMDD. I am here for the partners as well. So if you need those private sessions, make sure you go to inlovewithpmdd.com and get those tools. So let's get into this week's PMDD trauma transformational tools that is going to help you stop the monthly breakups and stop the suffering and stress in your PMDD relationship. Let's get into it. Today, we are all going to be talking about trauma and PMDD. So I really wanted to break down how PMDD is traumatic and how it really impacts your relationship. And so I'm going to go back to the basics of really understanding what trauma is and how it directly correlates to what you're going through with your partner on a monthly basis. So a lot of times when we're talking about trauma, we're thinking about individual events. We're thinking about something happened and we're having a lot of trauma for that one event. But because PMDD is so cyclical and it happens on a month-to-month basis, we have what we call complex trauma. What this means is it's trauma built upon other traumatic events and other traumatic events. So a lot of times, if you're not aware that you're going through trauma while you're in PMDD, you're in that situation where you're not getting a chance to recover from the last month of PMDD, and then you're going directly into another month of PMDD with more fights with your partner, more arguments, you're just not seeing eye to eye, and it's not allowing you to have any peace within your relationship. And that in itself is traumatic, okay? So what trauma is a physiological, emotional, and sometimes a physical response to an event or a series of events. So what we're specifically talking about for these series of events, it is all of the symptoms that you are intaking on a monthly basis. Because there's a combination of mental, physical, and emotional symptoms that are combined with PMDD, this is what makes it so traumatic, because your body and your mind are all trying to fight to really navigate what is going on. And because you go from in ovulation, where you may have a lot of energy and you may really just feel like, oh, I'm feeling really good. And then you go directly into feeling horrible. You go directly into having so many symptoms. It is a shock to your body, even though it's cyclical, even though it happens every single month, it's normally a shock because you're in that space of not expecting it. I know this has happened for me so many times where my ovulation is actually when I feel my best, because I have the most energy. I'm just coming out of my follicular phase. I'm getting so much done. I'm feeling really loving. And do I have physical symptoms in ovulation? Absolutely. But I said this before and I'll say it again. I would much rather have physical symptoms than the mental, emotional, and psychological symptoms that I have in PMDD. If all PMDD was muscle aches and cramps in my body, and I just felt tired, I would probably be fine because I have a high tolerance for pain. I think what causes the most suffering for me is when my mind starts going haywire. It's when my emotions are all over the place. It's when I have to second guess myself. It's the forgetfulness. So when PMDD starts to attack the brain and I have to start questioning things again and again and again, that is when it causes me the most pain and suffering in PMDD. And that's what's most traumatic for me. So you may be in a situation where it's traumatic for you to have physical symptoms, where the fact that you can't get out of the bed a lot of times is traumatic for you. So you may end up saying, okay, well, I can deal with the mental aspect of PMDD way better than I can deal with the physical side. It really differs per person. I know for me, physical symptoms, not a big deal. psychological symptoms a big deal? So I really want you to ask yourself that question right now when we're talking about what is most traumatic for you. Is it most traumatic for you to have mental, emotional symptoms, or is it most traumatic for you to have physical symptoms? Because this is a way that you can really differentiate what you're going to put your focus on when you go into PMDD. Because if you think about the myriad, the amount of PMDD symptoms that you have, and you're just like, oh, I'm going to try to like tackle them all at one time. You don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the energy to tackle all of your PMDD symptoms at the same time. Anxiety, depression, fatigue, muscle aches, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to touch, irritability, anger, rage, sensitivity to even smells. There's so many symptoms that PMDD has, and you really need to pick and choose which are most traumatic for you. And that is going to help you when you go on a journey of trying to manage your PMDD symptoms. You can say, okay, these are the things that I need to work on first. So for me, I immediately went to, okay, what can I do to what I call rewire my PMDD brain? What can I do to cause me to not suffer with all of these intrusive thoughts? Intrusive thoughts was one of my biggest things that causes me to suffer so much when I'm in PMDD, because it's like I'm constantly thinking about these negative thoughts again and again and again, and they're ruminating. And then I'm questioning, are they true? Should I be leaning into them? Is the real me when I'm in PMDD, or are these just thoughts that are tricking me? Like, just the fact that there's so much chaos and confusion causes me to suffer a lot of times when I'm in PMDD, because I'm wanting to know the truth. I'm wanting to know clarity. I'm wanting to just come and say, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do in my PMDD relationship, and let that be it. But when you're in PMDD, there's all of these options. There's all of these things like, should you do this? Should you do that? Should you do this? And when you have the chaos and confusion in your mind, when you're in PMDD and you have those intrusive thoughts, it causes you to really suffer. And that is very traumatic. So like I said before, these traumatic experiences that you have when you're in PMDD, they really cause you to suffer a lot in your relationship, because you're trying to navigate your relationship and you're trying to navigate to balance the two. Because if you don't have a hold on your own PMDD symptoms, and then you're going straight on dealing with, your partner and maybe their reaction to what you're going on in PMDD, it makes it very differently. And so let's talk about the types of trauma. Let's talk about, because there's many different types of trauma, and we're going to talk about them. So the first type of trauma is acute trauma. This is not what we have in PMDD. Acute trauma is one incident happened and that's it. It's like a national disaster, a violent attack. Think 9/11. Like someone who went through 9/11, those are the things that are like, that's an acute trauma. They had one traumatic event and that's it. And I know I've been in a car accident before. So that would be an example of me saying, okay, I have acute trauma. And this is a situation where I had that one event, I had that one car accident, I walked away from that, and the trauma, all of the trauma that I have is linked back to that one moment. So remember, acute trauma is one moment. So chronic trauma is from repeated and prolonged exposure to the stressful events. So this is what we have in PMDD. We have chronic trauma. What this means is you're going through PMDD every single month, again and again and again. So a lot of times what this means is, because it's cyclical, everything that you've gone through last month, you're now going through it again. So you're getting into that mode of, you're not getting a chance to get a break from it. You're not getting a chance to get a release from that trauma. So that's why it's chronic. And that's why you can even have chronic stress in conjunction with the chronic trauma, because you're not getting any relief from all of the suffering that you're having. And so the next thing is complex trauma. So this is the third type of trauma. And this is results from exposure to multiple traumatic events. Okay, so this is an example of, say you're going through your PMDD relationship and you're fighting and you're arguing and you're not seeing eye to eye. And so you're having days and days and days of fighting with your partner, days and days and days of not seeing eye to eye. This is when you have complex trauma, meaning we just argued about something yesterday. Now we're going back and we're arguing about it again. And now tomorrow there's going to be something else. So if you think about the fact that PMDD is 14 days out of the month, approximately 7 to 14 days out of the month, you have a very high susceptibility to have complex trauma because you're not just dealing with one issue, you're dealing with multiple issues. So, what we're recognizing with trauma is that within PMDD, you have two types of trauma that happen with you on a monthly basis. You have the chronic trauma because you have the prolonged exposure to it because you're not getting a break for those 14 days. And then you're also having the complex trauma. And the complex trauma is that thing that is making you suffer where you feel like you're exhausted. This is when you get into burnout because you feel like I wake up in tomorrow and I'm like, we're still arguing about this last thing, but then you trigger me because you bring up something else. So now we're arguing about multiple things. And here's the thing about trauma. Trauma will follow you until you heal it. You will not be able to move on from a traumatic experience in your mind. It will follow you. I have private clients that are talking about trauma from their childhood because they never healed from it in their childhood. So for all of you that are feeling like you could just cover it up, or for all of you are feeling like you could just ignore it, trauma doesn't go anywhere because trauma leaves an impact on your mind. It leaves an impact on your body. And when you're going through those traumatic events and you're recalling those traumatic events, every single time that you're remembering them, it's almost like you're going through them all over again. Every single time that you're remembering what your partner said to you, you're feeling those same emotions of what they said to you. So what happens? You're getting offended all over again. You're thinking to yourself, I don't have to deal with this. And you're thinking that the way to get rid of this complex trauma, the way to get rid of this chronic trauma is to just break up with my partner. Because if I wasn't with my partner, I wouldn't be in the situation of having to deal with this. But what you're not really understanding is when you haven't dealt with the trauma of the past, then that means it's just going to carry on into the future. So even if you go into another relationship, even if you go into another partnership with someone completely different, those traumatic events are going to start to come up because when that partner starts to do something that mirrors what your current partner is doing, you're automatically going to go back to that place and you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, like it's happening again. It's happening again. Like this person is going to leave me. This person is going to cheat on me. This person is going to abandon me. This person is going to neglect me. You're going to automatically assume the worst of your partner because you haven't healed the trauma of your last relationship. So let's go into what are some symptoms of trauma? What are some symptoms that you're going through traumatic experiences within your PMDD? So the first thing is a lot of symptoms that we have within PMDD, which is the emotional symptoms. It is the anxiety. It is the depression. It is the PMDD rage. You know that PMDD rage, which is that uncontrollable anger that you feel. It is that fear of PMDD coming back again, the shame, the guilt of all of the things that you've said to your partner, all of the things that you've done to your partner that is, borderline abusive. I know it's like so taboo. You really don't want to say, like, no one wants to be an abusive PMDD partner. Nobody wants to be that. But when you're thinking back to some of the things that you've said and done, you're like, oh my gosh, that was abusive. Or maybe your partner has done some things to you that's abusive. And so you get into this realm of also one of the symptoms of trauma is having those mood swings where you may get to a place where you're like, oh, okay, I'm really loving with my partner, but then all of a sudden you think about things that they've said and you think about things that they've done, and then you pull away. Then all of a sudden you don't feel like you're loving. You don't feel like you want to lean in. You don't feel like you even want to use the tools because you're going through these up and down mood swings. And when you're going through a lot of these things mentally and emotionally, it starts to impact your body. I know for me, and I talk about it all the time, is that I have a lot of tension that shows up in my body and my shoulders, like in my traps. Like I used to get an overdose on getting massages. And I used to think that, oh, I'm just sore because I'm working out. No, I was sore because I had all of this trauma going on in my body. I was sore because I was holding on to things that my partner had said, holding on to things that my partner had done. And there was a lot of unforgiveness. And believe it or not, that unforgiveness caused a lot of tension in my body because it takes energy to not forgive. It takes energy to get in your partner's presence and all of a sudden you're cringing. You're cringing because of, what they've done before. Even if they're not physically doing it right now, you're just remembering it and you're feeling like, I need to get out of here. And so the next way that trauma really impacts you is the cognitive symptoms. So when we're in PMDD, we have a lot of cognitive symptoms such as forgetfulness, brain fog, confusion, difficulty concentrating, memory problems. Like there's been so many times where I've been in arguments and fights, and I've not even been able to remember why I was offended, like what my partner specifically said, because they would say to me, okay, you're mad at me. What did I say? And I couldn't specifically remember it because it was so traumatic. And so I got into that place of really suffering with not being able to remember. And then we go into those intrusive thoughts. Those are those negative thoughts, those lies that begin to ruminate in your mind again and again and again, because intrusive thoughts are really just thoughts that are worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, when your partner does one thing, you automatically assume they're going to do it all the time. I know the biggest thing for me with intrusive thoughts is if my partner does something, I say, oh my gosh, it's always going to be like that. This is an intrusive thought when you're consistently thinking that just because your partner made a mistake, just because they said something to trigger you, just because they did something, that it's going to happen again and again and again. And then you start having flashbacks of when they've done it before. And you start to think to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm going to live my whole life like this. I'm going to live my whole life being disrespected. I'm going to live my whole life being ran all over. I'm going to live my whole life being triggered and not being happy. And so these are the symptoms of trauma, which is the emotional, the physical, the cognitive, and then we go into the behavioral. So a lot of times, once you've been suffering in your mind because of the trauma that you're going through, your behaviors start to shift and change. And this happens consciously or subconsciously, meaning on purpose or not on purpose. And you want to really avoid the traumatic event. There have been so many times where I've wanted to deny that I was in PMDD. This used to be my go-to earlier in my journey where my partner would say, aren't you in PMDD? And I'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm not in PMDD. I really have this concern about our relationship. I really have this concern about you. I really think you need to change this. And it's not because I'm in PMDD. It's because this is just what I think. Well, in reality, I really was in PMDD. And because I was having those intrusive thoughts, it was making me feel like I had to say something. I had to do something that made my partner want to change. I was feeling like if I kept bringing it up, if I kept over explaining it, if I kept explaining it a different way, that I would get him to understand, that I would get him to change. So the thing that I want to remind you about is that when you're having these behavioral changes, you're not just avoiding being in PMDD. Sometimes you can be avoiding having conversations with your partner about PMDD. And sometimes when your partner tries to bring it up, you're like avoiding it. And the next thing is you might have social withdrawal, meaning you don't want to hang out with friends as often. I know a lot of times you can feel insecure and feel like, oh, your partner is knowing that you're in PMDD. They know that you're in PMDD, they know that you're suffering, and you feel subconscious about it. You're like, oh, I don't want to go because of this. I don't want to go because of that. Even if no one else notices that you're in PMDD, you'll probably start avoiding going into social interactions just because you don't want them to pick up on the suffering that you're going through internally. And the other behavioral symptom of trauma, of course, is the changes in sleeping and eating patterns, which are symptoms of PMDD. I know when I go into PMDD, I could sleep 10 to 12 hours a night and still wake up and not feel rested. I will feel completely exhausted. I will feel completely fatigued. And this is a sign that I've gone through trauma or I'm presently going through trauma. And then we get into those eating patterns that are changing. Like you have a lot of cravings. I know I went through 2 months ago, I went through really, really bad cravings. And I just, I remember how bad I felt in my body because when you are having issues with, overeating or eating crappy things, you start to have inflammation in your body. Your body is inflamed because it's consuming more than it really needs. And what happens when your body is inflamed? Your PMDD symptoms increase. So a lot of times, if you haven't tracked this, when you're in PMDD and your symptoms are really bad, I want you to watch what you've been putting into your body. And I know what you say, easier said than done, Dr. Rose, because it feels like the cravings are so strong that if I don't give my body what it is that it needed, that is just going to make me feel worse. Or maybe if you're overeating, you're feeling like the more I eat these foods, the better I feel. So I almost feel like I should be eating these foods. I should be overeating. I should be doing this, even though it's actually causing you suffering. So I had to get to that point where I really disciplined myself to say, I know it would feel good in my body. Like I know it would feel good to eat this food, eat this crap that I'm craving. I crave really salty and sweet things at the same time. And I really think to myself, like, oh, well, if I just give myself what I want, then I'll feel better. Well, I don't feel better. I actually feel worse after I do it. So I had to train my brain to not give in. So a lot of times when you're having these traumatic events like PMDD and you're wanting to like lay in your bed and eat and watch Netflix, you have to really think, how does that make you feel afterwards? And now, if it made you feel better, if you felt rejuvenated after you did it, I would be like, okay, go ahead and give yourself a break and do it. But what I want you to recognize, it doesn't make you feel better. So the impact that this trauma has is it really impacts your relationships. You have a difficulty with trusting, you have a difficulty with communication, you have a difficulty with intimacy. All of these things start to happen because you're going through trauma in your PMDD relationship. And what I want you to know is that once you recognize, yes, Dr. Rhodes, we have traumatic things that are going on in our relationship, and it's causing us to become distant. This is where I really urge you to get help for it, because when you become distant from your partner because you're suffering a PMDD and it's so cyclical, you have to do something about it so that you don't continue in that same pattern and become so distant that it's almost like you're broken up before you're even broken up. Because there's this emotional instability that your partner may feel, where they may feel like, I know who you are when you're in your follicular days. When you're in your good days, I know who you are. I love who you are. But then when you get into, PMDD, it's like your partner might not like the PMDD version of you. They may feel like it's too much because they don't have the tools, because they feel like, they can't measure up. Everything they do is the wrong thing to do. And then it feels like they're just walking on eggshells. So a lot of times you get to that place where you're dealing with a lot of those emotional symptoms and you're feeling like, I don't know what to do about it. But the thing about trauma is it makes you feel confused as to what to do next. It's almost like, I want to turn this off, but I don't know how to turn this off. I want these intrusive thoughts to stop, but I don't know how to make them stop. So you're thinking to yourself, what can I do to make them stop? And so it's like when I've had private clients and they talk to me about what they suffer with the most, and they said, it's the chaos and confusion, which is why we always want peace. We always want peace because we're so uncertain about everything. And the uncertainty is the most traumatic aspect of PMDD, because you don't know what's real and you don't know what's true and you don't know what's right and you don't know what's wrong. And your brain is constantly making you feel like you have to figure it out. And a lot of times, because you're suffering so much within your mind, those thoughts becomes your actions and your behaviors that you're not proud of, and you have all this irritability and behavior. It breaks down how you communicate to your partner. When you start to be really irritable for days and days and days, and your partner picks up on it, they can get offended. Your partner can be irritable because you're irritable. Your partner can become angry because you're angry. And then you end up having all of these misunderstandings. And you're having to explain yourself, except you can't remember all the details in order to explain yourself. So now sometimes what you think is the cure, what you think is, okay, I know what I need to do. Sometimes you're thinking, I just need to withdraw. I need to distance myself from my partner, because that's what's going to make my relationship so much better. Meaning, if I didn't have to deal with my partner one-on-one, if I didn't have to deal with them and deal with their feelings and deal with the misunderstandings, then maybe our relationship would be better. But what happens is there's a lack of intimacy when you're doing that distancing. And when you start to mess with the intimacy in the relationship, this is when your partner can start to act out of character. I remember so many times I used to think to myself and even say to myself, like, I can't believe my partner is talking to me like this. I can't believe they're treating me like this. And a lot of times when your partner is mistreating you, it's because they're not intimate with you. They're not close to you. It's not really doing anything. It's not doing anything for them to hurt you because they're not connected to you. And so you get to this place where you're like, well, I might as well just stay to myself every time I go into PMDD. But if you think about it, that means you're committing to staying to yourself for 7 to 14 days out of the month. And then you have that other week where you're on your cycle. And then you just have that 1 week. And you just have that one other week where you're good. And it's almost like a teaser for your partner because they're almost like, oh, I can see the real you. And a lot of times your partner is just holding on because of who you are in that 1 week. And that's a very hard thing to come to the realization about, because I know for me, I had to realize that. I'm like, my partner loves me in my follicular phase, adores me in my follicular phase, absolutely doesn't like me in PMDD, absolutely doesn't like the PMDD version of me. And when I really came to recognize that, it was very humbling to even mention that, to be like, wow, when I'm in PMDD, my partner doesn't like that version of me, but that's literally me. For me, my cycle is 14 days. So that's literally me for 14 days. So then what does that mean? Does my partner only love half of me? Am I committing to a life with someone who only loves half of me? So I really want you to understand that when you're going through PMDD like this, and you're feeling like you're being misunderstood by your partner, and you're stressing, you're having these traumatic events, is causing you to have a lot of chronic stress. So chronic stress and chronic trauma go hand in hand. And the reason why you're having chronic stress is because of the cyclical nature of PMDD. Remember, we talked about the chronic trauma, meaning every single time you finish with PMDD, you're almost anticipating another episode of PMDD. You almost don't feel like you want to calm down. You don't want to get to that point where you just relax and enjoy your partner, even in moments where you would relax and enjoy your partner, because you're feeling like, if I relax and enjoy my partner, am I going to get to this place where the other shoe is going to drop, and then they're going to be distant with me again, or they're going to be snappy or moody with me again. When you're having issues with feelings of guilt and shame, it is because you've gone through this traumatic experience and you've reacted in a way that you're not proud of. And we've all been there where we've reacted in a way and it's like, I'm not proud of what I said. I'm not proud of what I did. I wish I could go back in time. I think one of the biggest regrets and the biggest causes of trauma in the realm of guilt and shame is the pain of regret. The pain of regret of, I should have handled that situation better. So you with PMDD, you might feel guilty for even having your symptoms and the way that they impact your partner. So you may start to have low self-esteem and low self-worth, and you don't feel worthy of having a loving relationship. Your partner may be great, but you don't feel worthy of having a great partner because of things that you've said and done in PMDD. And then you may even get to a point where you're dealing with the guilt and the blame, that you may start blaming your partner. You may become frustrated with them, and you're literally saying to yourself, if I didn't have PMDD, my partner would be so much better off without me. Or if my partner wouldn't trigger me so much in PMDD, I wouldn't be as worse off. My symptoms wouldn't be as bad if I had a partner that was more understanding, if I had a partner that was more gentle, if I had a partner that was more loving, if I had a partner that was more considerate, if I had a partner that spoke to me nicely, then I wouldn't go off on them on PMDD rage. I wouldn't be having these symptoms. So now you're in a system where you're literally blaming your partner for the symptoms that you're having. And when they're feeling that blame and that shame, what is the main thing that's going to come from that is that they're going to start getting defensive, and they're going to start bringing up things that you've said and done. And you're going to end up in this cycle, and you're not going to like it. When you end up in this cycle, you're just going to feel like, I don't know what else to do. You may feel like, this is all I know to do. This is all I know to do, is to just grin and bear this trauma. And so what I've really done, and I'm opening up this group to you, because I have a lot of clients that don't have PMDD, and I do a lot of conferences. And what I've done is I've opened up this conference on trauma called Trauma Transformations. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. It starts August the 7th. So it's Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. and it's going to be for 8 weeks long. It is completely free. And I felt it was so important to really open it up to you, because I know there's so many of you that are going through trauma and PMDD, but then you also have gone through traumatic experiences. You have PTSD, you have OCD, you have childhood trauma. I know I have childhood trauma. So I'm teaching this class, and I really want you to be able to join for these 8 weeks, to really come on and learn tactics. So if you know that you listen to this episode and you're like, yes, Dr. Rose, I'm dealing with trauma. That PMDD is traumatic for me, and I really don't know what to do about it. And you're feeling like, I could have these private sessions with you, but I really just want to see what it's like to really get the tools. Then I want you to join this group. It is an 8-week group. It is completely free. It has nothing to do specifically with PMDD. It's all about trauma. But again, we just discussed that trauma and PMDD go hand in hand. So I wanted to make sure that I opened this up to you. What I'm really going to be teaching you is what I teach a lot with my private clients, and that's rewiring your PMDD brain, renewing your mind about the traumatic experience, uncovering and healing it once and for all. Because what we say about trauma? It follows you. I know for a fact I have childhood trauma, and I had childhood trauma from the age of 2 all the way to the age of 17, and until I wasn't a child anymore, basically. I was verbally, physically abused. And it followed me in my relationships. It always came up in my relationships. So I really want you to get to a place of recognizing, even if you don't have trauma from PMDD, which I'm pretty sure you do, because we all do. But if you're feeling like, oh, it's not that traumatic for me, then I want you to look back on your life and just think about things that have happened. I had someone come up to me today. I had an opening, a meet and greet for my trauma group, Trauma Transformations. And they said, Dr. Rose, I don't think I have any trauma. I'm just a positive person, and blah, blah, blah. And a couple minutes into speaking about things, there was trauma. So a lot of times you don't recognize, you hear trauma as this big word and you're thinking, oh, that's not me. That's not me. Like I don't have all of those things going on, but I want you to know you probably do. And they are for sure going to follow you. And I want you to be able to have the tools as to what you can do about it. So make sure you join. I look forward to seeing you on August the 7th in my Trauma Transformations group, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, USA. I'm going to see if I can do the recording, because I know this podcast is in over 60 countries. So there's the time zone differences is a big deal, but I want you to be able to get linked in, get the tools that are going to be free for this next 8 weeks. And it's going to be just a sample of what you would get working with me privately. So if you've been thinking about what it would be like to work with me privately, then I want you to join this group session. I'll be open to answering questions. It's going to be for 90 minutes. All of the details are going to be down here in the show notes. And I look forward to really meeting with you and really starting your journey of recognizing that PMDD is a traumatic event and you've gone through a lot. I don't care if you're just a partner. If you're just a partner that is going through PMDD in your relationship, you're going through trauma. And that's what I wrote my dissertation on. I wrote my dissertation on the suffering of the partners and what it is that they are going through, because it's very traumatic. And I know as we're learning more about PMDD, we're giving a lot of tools to the individuals that suffer with PMDD, but partners go through so much. And I know this because I have so many of them that are private clients, and you're carrying so much. And you're trying your best, but you're feeling like it's not being recognized. You're feeling like you're not good enough. You're feeling all of these things. And I really just want you to get to this point where you're getting the tools, you're getting the support that you need for just being in a relationship that involves PMDD, which is very traumatic. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And until next time, we got this. Love you. I hope this PMDD episode helped you and your partner in your struggles within your relationship. And if this is something that you know that you need help with and you need further support, individualized support, make sure you're going to inlovewithpmdd.com and you're getting those private sessions to really work through what you're going through in your relationship, specifically in regards to PMDD. And also, I want you to leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. What this does is it helps other PMDD sufferers and partners find this show that can help them get these free PMDD relationship tools. I remember what it felt like to not know that there were tools out there specifically for PMDD relationships. So I want to make sure that you are sharing these tools with others, share them on your social media, share them with people that you know that are also struggling in their PMDD relationships. Until next episode, this is Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist. One more thing, I almost forgot. I now have the Fresh Start PMDD Partners Workbook. What this workbook can do is if you've had past traumatic experiences with your partner, past fights, past arguments, and they keep coming up every single month in PMDD, I created a Fresh Start Workbook so that you can deal with all of the traumatic experiences that have happened in the past in PMDD rage and all of these things so you can stop going through the same cycle again and again and again. So get that workbook. It comes with a video episode of the actual podcast that I recorded on getting a fresh start in your PMDD relationship. So you're not continuing the same cycle again and again and again. So make sure that you get that workbook. And if you need those individualized counseling sessions, you know where to go, inlovewithpmdd.com. Until next time, we got this. Love you.